I'm Lacey.
And I'm Sam.
Welcome to Monster Soup and Creature Brews, the podcast where we talk about all things monster movies, big, small, creepy, or downright ridiculous.
From movie monsters to cryptids lurking in the shadows of folklore, we're here to explore them all. So kick back, grab a snack,
Or a drink.
and let's dive into some monster-filled mayhem.
Today we're going to be talking about the 1998 Godzilla movie. And to kick us off here, Sam is going to read the official synopsis.
French nuclear tests irradiate an iguana into a giant monster that heads off to New York City. The American military must chase the monster across the city to stop it before it reproduces.
Alright, and then for fun, I've asked ChatGPT to explain a plotline badly. And here's what they had to say. A giant lizard with a bad attitude destroys New York City while avoiding military attempts to stop it. Meanwhile, a group of reporters chases the lizard around, mostly to try and take selfies, and to figure out how to catch it, all while dealing with a love triangle that no one asked for. In the end, the giant lizard is apparently too smart to be killed, but its baby lizards are definitely easier to defeat. Roll credit. Dumb.
I mean, it's not too far off.
You know what? Honestly, the only thing I didn't get about that one is I don't think there's a love triangle in this movie.
You can kind of say that. For Hollywood's sake, there's a love triangle. That was the only reason they put a paleontologist in there to hit on Matthew. So.
Yeah, but they weren't involved. She just made some mildly sexual harassing comments to him.
Yes, but that could have ended up doing something.
Maybe. I don't know.
If he didn't have an ex-girlfriend that he was pining over, something would have happened there.
We disagree, but we're going to kick off and go ahead and start recapping this movie. All right, and Sam here has his note. Dun, dun, dun.
All right, buckle up. It's a long synopsis. The movie opens with panorama of different lizards, Komodo dragons, iguanas, swimming, walking around, and then people in gas masks. Very classic Godzilla. Lots of overlapping military testing, usually culminating in a giant mushroom cloud, alluding to nuclear testing. Scene ends by zooming in on an egg hatcher, and then the opening credits end. And then in also Godzilla fashion, it switches to a Japanese fishing boat that looks like they have some kind of fish canning operation going on. There's a large bleep on their little radar. The alarms start blasting. The ship starts experiencing huge waves, and before you know it, a giant lizard tail crashes into the bridge and setting up the iconic surviving fisherman who's going to eventually say Godzilla. And then you cut to Nick
Tatopoulos. Which becomes a reoccurring joke throughout the whole movie that no one can say this poor man's name.
Yeah.
And so everybody just ends up calling him Nick, even though he's technically Dr. Nico Tatopoulos.
Yes, played by Matthew Broderick, good old Ferris Bueller himself. The scene starts with him driving while singing in the rain. He starts setting up some equipment with a completely exposed battery terminals, which seems very unsafe.
Also, I'd like to say that we are children of the 90s, nobody was wearing their Walkman out with those foam headphones in the middle of the rain.
Yeah, not.
That's how you ruined both the Walkman and your day.
Yeah. And then there's a little foreshadowing. They show pictures of him and a mysterious blonde woman. And then out of nowhere, a military helicopter comes down, drops a bunch of troops who take all of his equipment and then tells him, hey, you're coming with us. And then it transitions to what looks like a hospital and a bunch of presumably doctors surrounding an old Japanese man. And then a weird Frenchman with a lighter just starts waving it with the flame, and then you have the iconic line, Gojira, Gojira.
Which apparently is supposed to make this poor traumatized Japanese fisherman talk to them magically. I'm so confused about that point of the movie.
And then it goes back to Nick being escorted around by a military colonel who Nick is talking about some random worms that he's been investigating for years and how he has to get back to it. And how he thinks they've all been infected by nuclear testing because they're 10 times larger than they're supposed to be.
17% bigger, which I looked up. They're 10 inches long. It's really not that impressive.
Right? Fat worms. And then the military officer leads him into what is a giant footprint. And after 10 seconds of him being oh my God, we get introduced to what I'm assuming ChatGPT assumes is the first part of the love triangle, Dr. Elise Chapman, played by Vicki Lewis. The first part of the awkward love triangle. And then it just immediately cuts away again to New York, where you see a small town girl who looks exactly like the girl in the picture with Nick. She's the stereotypical country girl trying to make it in the big city.
Is she from the country?
I don't know. But she has an asshole boss who's trying to sleep with her so she can move up in the company. And she's like, I've been working for you for 3 years. I've been working late. I just need a chance. And he's like, yeah, why don't you come have dinner with me? And then
Give you a chance if you look in my pants.
Right. This is a constant part of this movie is that they just cut back and forth, back and forth. So they go back to the military where Nick gets introduced to all of the other people in their crew. We also get the colonel's name at this point, Colonel Hicks. And they talk about how they've been investigating fishing boats that have been getting destroyed out at sea. And they show him the video of the fisherman who's saying Gojira. And then it cuts to them going out to a destroyed boat that's been beached on the side. Oh, I missed a part. So they cut to a random set of fishing boats out to sea who appear to be caught their fishing nets on something. And for some reason they stop moving. And then Godzilla again shows up, destroys the boats. And they're all just sitting out at sea being like, well, what do we do now? Then it goes back to the military. You see Nick and a bunch of military personnel that are inspecting the fishing boat that got beached.
All I'm going to say is that, like, nobody went, like, the boat's clearly being dragged under. Let's go get a life vest or a boat or anything to, like, help us, call the Coast Guard. They're all just like, oh, no.
Well, I mean, to be fair, this isn't like we're sinking. Their boat literally got capsized in, like, 2 seconds. So they literally just like, very similar to Titanic, where they're just flying off the boat.
Still seems like a moment where, you know,
someone should
an emergency plan in place would have been ideal.
I can't say that me in that situation would have thought, oh, hey, a gigantic, 50-story lizard is going to come attack our boat. Be ready at all times.
You know what? Not a fisherman, but if I was a fisherman, I think in the back of my head, always be ready for the giant lizard.
Likely story. Anyways, they go back to Nick and the military are investigating what happened to the Japanese fishing boat. And we run into the mysterious Frenchman again, who's claiming to be an insurance officer now. And they mysteriously end up back on a airplane going who knows where. And the team start to speculate on what could have happened to the boat as well as what's up with the giant footprint. The paleontologist thinks that it's a prehistoric creature. Nick speculates that it could be a mutated creature from a nuclear fallout.
Which I think this movie is the best example I've seen in a while of, like, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Because the paleontologist straight to dinosaur.
Yeah, and then
Nick,
the guy that's
straight to mutated thing.
Well, and a running trend in this movie, too, is that Nick is always right. The man doesn't miss. Every time he comes up with an idea or a thought, it's magically right. So while they're doing all their speculating, it cuts back to New York, and we finally get the leading lady's name, Audrey, who's played by Maria Patillo.
They're going to drag you for that. That's definitely not how you say that.
I don't care. As she speaks with her friends about her boss trying to take advantage of her, it cuts back to some fishermen about to have a very bad day. Godzilla finally makes his full on-screen appearance as this poor old fisherman that's just fishing at the end of the dock runs for his life as Godzilla begins his first of many rampages through New York. We get a glimpse of our New York mayor giving a speech as the whole area begins to rumble. And a side note, I love seeing like Barney or any of those old 90s
cartoons on in the background. Yeah. Well, there's a couple movies, because this movie is from 1998, where you just transported back to your childhood and you're like Walkmans.
Yes. Seeing a lot of the like
Barney, the Twin Towers still exist and are in New York.
Yeah, that's another side note, is they reference something that I completely forgot about. I forgot that there was a bombing in the Twin Towers before they actually went down. And they talk about that throughout the movie, about how, there's another attack. And you actually see the Twin Towers go down in this movie, which is like some crazy foreshadowing for like 3 years later. They actually do go down. But yeah, they just wreck buildings in this movie. Anyways, we go back to Audrey, and she's briefly mentioning about how she had a boyfriend, many years ago, that they used to date. And then we get introduced to our cameraman, Victor Animal Pilati, played by Hank Azaria. Narrowly missed being pavement paced when Godzilla starts stepping right in front of him, and he's fumbling with his camera to try to get it on film.
He definitely peed himself in that scene.
100%. Somehow, the military loses track of a giant skyscraper-sized lizard, and it's a running theme in this movie that the military is just incompetent in every way, shape, and form. I really want to know I want to look up who pitched this movie, because they wanted to make the military look as stupid as possible, which
maybe they just didn't do the homework. Maybe they're kind of like us, and like there's just bits of this that we're like, we could look that up, but we're not going to.
There's just so many basic things that they're just like, what's the one thing that could make the military look stupid in this scene? And then they proceed to do it. I'll get back to that.
I like when they finally figure out that Godzilla has gone underground, and it takes them way too long to figure that out because Godzilla's gigantic.
Yeah, there's a giant fucking hole in the middle of New York City, and they don't see it.
And they're like, brick it up. And the one poor military guy asked a very reasonable question, like, how would you like me to do that? And he's like, I don't care. Use cement. Use brick. Break it up. And I'm like, okay, this lizard has clearly gone through like miles of concrete and rebar and buildings, and you're gonna like pour wet cement and that's magically gonna stop it.
And we're gonna magically get cement to these areas.
It's
like,
raining. First of all, every scene in this movie, it must have cost a fortune. It's raining. It rains the whole time. It rains more in this movie than I think New York has ever seen.
Yeah.
Not from New York. That could be totally wrong. I'm not gonna look it up.
Everyone I know from New York has never complained about the rain or talked about how often it rains there. I've never heard that.
Yeah, totally reasonably asked.
It's not like Seattle.
How we block these holes.
Look at Seattle. Like, it's known for it being rainy there all the time, New York. Anyways, that's another thing they do in this movie, is they just refuse to call Godzilla anything but a he. Like, not a it, not a they, not a she, just always he. It has to be a boy. They're going so far as to say that it has to reproduce asexually, instead of saying that it might be a girl or that there might be a second one.
Yeah, so...
It's crazy.
During one of Godzilla's many rampages, I think the first one, maybe, they do accidentally manage to injure it. And then Dr. Nick, here, the worm guy, takes blood and somehow manages to use that blood in an at-home, over-the-counter urine pregnancy test to discover that Godzilla is pregnant. And then instantly jumps to the fact that Godzilla's asexual, instead of being like, maybe it's actually just a girl and there could be two of them. But no, there couldn't possibly be two.
They don't even entertain that possibility.
No.
They're just like, blinders on, it's a boy, it reproduces asexually, let's keep moving.
Well, and what's crazy to me about that too is that, like, Godzilla's huge. Godzilla's always huge, right? It took time for Godzilla to grow to be that huge. And also, y'all lost it in like 5 minutes. So the argument that there couldn't possibly be two because we could have noticed it doesn't really hold water. Like, my first thought would have been like, okay, this one's a girl. That means there's a male, probably slightly smaller out there, and we should be very concerned.
My beef is that they actively avoid calling it anything but a he. Like, aggressively. And it's kind of crazy.
Like, honestly, give it a nickname or something.
Yeah. Anyways, after Godzilla disappears and the military can't find it anymore, they jump back to Audrey, who actually catches sight of Nick coming in with the military as they're setting up camp. And then she has the bright idea that this might be a good lead and might give her a chance up in her career. Cut back to the mayor. They see him speaking with the Frenchman, who's apparently a reporter now. And then he very not so subtly plants a bug on the mayor. How does no one notice this?
It was the 90s. People weren't concerned about spies back then.
I guess, but there's like 1,000 people around him, and he just pats him on the back of his collar, and magically there's a bug on there.
This was before 9/11. You were allowed to touch people back then. It was before COVID. You were allowed to touch people back then.
And then they plants a bug on the mayor. Audrey gets blown off by her boss after she's like, hey, I know someone on the inside. And he's like, yeah, let me do the real reporting, honey. And then in that exchange, she manages to steal his press pass, which, God, that's a relic of the past. I wonder, do they still do that? Like, I'm assuming there's a digital press pass now. Like, you have to show some kind of verification.
Or QR
yeah, because
code.
like the whole having a lanyard with your name on it seems very easy to impersonate.
Well, I mean, like, maybe it's because I know when I worked at the hospital, like, we had that and you would scan it and everything like that, but you were only ever like issued very specific clearance for very specific doors.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not a reporter. Not from New York. No one come for us.
I'm sure there's a better way to do it now. Anyways, back with the Frenchman, we see another running joke, which is him making fun of coffee. Every other scene, it's like him trying to drink coffee, and he's like, Americans call this coffee.
Well, I mean, like, if you get it from the hotel bar, it's probably going to be pretty rough.
Yeah, I don't understand who was making the jokes in this movie. That literally was a whole scene where he just drinks some coffee and he's like, oh, this American coffee is trash. And then it goes back to the military, and the mayor is arguing with Colonel Hicks, who's attempting to convince the mayor that they should evacuate. Because why would we not evacuate when there's a giant lizard running around? He doesn't want to.
You're overpopulated anyway.
They would
Don't
lose
worry about it.
millions of dollars if they evacuate because money is greater than safety. Not long after they discover a giant hole in the middle of the city and realize that Godzilla could be digging tunnels and running around under the city. And here we come with another of Nick's brilliant ideas. He comes up with a plan. Let's lure him out. So they literally truck in like literal tons of fish and make a giant pile. And then the French managed to slip a spy into the military area, tap a closed circuit loop of cameras so they can see everything that's going on. This is amazing to me that they're going to such lengths to make the military look stupid. Oh, I'm starting to think this was funded by the French to make themselves look really good and the Americans look really stupid. And then there's more complaining about coffee, and then somehow through this whole movie it's raining for some reason. After realizing they need the sin of the fish to go through the sewer, another idea by Nick, they pull up all the manholes around the fish, and then out of nowhere, Godzilla gets it right on point, pops up out of the underground, and gets face to face with Nick, and he pulls out a disposable Kodak camera and takes a little snapshot.
And he takes pictures throughout this whole movie with his little disposable like camera that you get from Walgreens, and all I can think is what is he using, like a personal album?
My thing is those cameras didn't have a wide aspect.
No.
So like Godzilla was so close to him, all he got was just no. Like you didn't see all of Godzilla.
But he's not gonna know that until he takes it to Walgreens and gets it developed,
right?
And then it's like, oh right, it was raining, and this is a $2 camera.
How compact the aspect ratio was for those cameras. One, they were like a 4x3. So they were like not great at all, and they were tiny. Like you didn't get much. You couldn't get a wide angle shot on those little cameras. So I don't know what he was trying to take a picture of, because Godzilla is like nose to nose with him in that scene.
I think this is at my point in the notes where I notated that nobody in this movie knows how to run to the side. For some reason, they all run straight and are all promptly squished. Whereas if they had just gone to the side, New York's full of alleyways, and they would have been fine.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I think that, like, no one wanted to be the one person running to the side. Because if you're the one person and Godzilla decides, hey, he looks younger than everyone else.
No, Godzilla eats fish in this movie. So, like, seriously, nobody knows how to weave in this movie.
Anyways, he gets right up in Nick's face, does a little roar, eats his snacks, and then just tries to bounce. Just starts running, and the military is like, open fire! And they destroy half of New York City while Godzilla's running away, crushing buildings.
And this is
and they're
the
just
point
shooting missiles
where
like crazy.
The graphics in this movie, you can tell the age of the movie. Because Godzilla's decent, not compared to today, but for the time.
Looks like trash compared to Godzilla.
But like New York is just a flat, super even. It looks like old video games, just the same building on loop as he runs.
Yeah, it looks like the old Spider-Man video games where you can see like just the sky tops.
Right. So that's the moment where the movie really, really shows its age right there.
You can see all the budget went into making Godzilla look realistic.
And not the buildings. They were like,
No.
you know what, we can draw these, no one's going to notice, don't worry about it.
It literally looks like Godzilla looks legitimate, while everything behind Godzilla looks like a video game or animated versus looking like real.
It's fine. Nobody was going to notice it. They're going to look at the lizard.
Yep. So they send helicopters who's shooting missiles and destroying buildings. The Chrysler building gets destroyed. Like I said, half of New York gets destroyed simply by the military, not just Godzilla. Godzilla does like maybe about 10% of the damage, and military does the other 90%.
It didn't occur to them that their heat-seeking missiles wouldn't work, so they just used those anyways. There was no, real testing here that was done.
Yeah, what's crazy to me is Hollywood does this a lot in the 90s, where they're like, use heat-seeking missiles. And it's like, they act like there weren't other types of missiles. There's laser-guided missiles. There's radar-guided missiles. There's a ton of other missiles.
My favorite thing, though, is that, they took the time to lure Godzilla out of the tunnel that it dug with fish. And at no point were they like, maybe we should lure it to a less populated area.
They did it right in the center of New York.
Maybe we should go
to
the outskirts.
Maybe they were afraid of it jumping in the water, because it can't swim.
It can swim.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They were afraid to do it near the edge, because then it could just eat its fish and just shove it in the water.
But even then, we do have submarines. There are missiles that can go in the water. Honestly, maybe going into the water is the best case scenario, because, less buildings to knock down.
I would assume, yes, killing it is a top priority, but luring it away from civilization is probably also a higher priority list.
Just a thought. If you're going to take the time to lure it, maybe lure it somewhere a little less crowded, people-y.
Anyways, Godzilla just gets away.
Yeah, they fail utterly.
Yeah. Missiles failed. They open with Gatling guns instead. They get juked by the dinosaur, because the dinosaur, unlike the people, knows how to bob and weave. So the dinosaur dodges all the missiles, all the Gatling gun fire, and then just wrecks the helicopters. And it's actually one of the funniest parts of the movie. And then, poof, the dinosaur just vanishes, or Godzilla just vanishes. They don't fucking know where it went anymore. And then we finally get the long-awaited reunion between Nick and Audrey, which is made extra awkward by the fact that Nick is purchasing a ton of pregnancy tests at a drugstore.
Which, once again, he scooped up blood to then go buy, at home, urine-based pregnancy test. Not a scientist, but I'm going to go ahead and say that that's not how those work, and that's not how they were ever going to work.
Yep.
But movie magic doesn't care.
I put on a side note here that Audrey is really toxic.
Oh, no, this is the point in my notes where I just have Audrey is the worst.
Yeah, she's
the worst kind of ex. She's the worst kind of person to run into.
She's gaslighting him, being like, are you still mad at me? Whatever. And then turns away and starts walking.
At no point apologizes for the fact that years years ago, she apparently like stomped over this poor dork's heart and then ghosted him.
Yep.
I don't think they used that term back then, but ghosted him.
all for her,
Then-
all for her advancement in her career.
Then shows up out of nowhere in the rain because it's raining in every scene in this movie and is like, what, you don't still love me? He could be married. Moving, you know what? According to ChatGPT, he's having hot sex with that paleontologist. So, you know what I mean? Like, he could have a whole family she doesn't know about.
He had options.
He's buying 12 pregnancy tests at the New York version of Walgreens.
Yeah.
He might have more on his plate than running into you. Audrey's the worst.
Yep, but that doesn't stop Nico from spilling everything to Audrey about all of the military secrets, about everything that's going on.
He manages to take her into the military compound, into his military tent with all of his... For some reason, he has all the videos.
I will say, I would understand because this is just like an open fob in the middle of the city. So they're like, it's probably less security, but I don't think he would have managed to get a random civilian in to his like supposed to be secure area.
Well, and
it
like,
just doesn't
hypothetically, Godzilla's destroyed half the city. You know there's a lot of damage and dead people. You would think that there'd be someone like, hey man, maybe now's not the time to bring this random blonde woman back into your tent.
I just think it's even crazier that like he had all of that sensitive information just sitting in his tent. And like,
all the videos.
Okay, if you watch it, cool, but you got to give it back right after you watch it. And then someone needs to be guarding this. This is classified information, right?
You know what? Here's what happened, Sam. Here's what happened. There was a guard who was like, nice. Take that blonde woman back to your tent, dude. Live it up.
So you joke, but
YOLO.
that potentially could have been what happened there.
I remember our military days. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
YOLO. Get it?
While he's spilling everything to Audrey, he starts to put blood on the lizard pregnancy test.
Well, first he like somehow manages to put it in a beaker and turn it yellow, and then takes the yellow liquid, which is not urine, because at no point did Godzilla pee on him, and then uses that for the pregnancy test. There's no real science happening here. It's all magic.
No, it gets better because then he starts making these like nonsensical leaps of logic into like what's going on, and then he has to go to the lab to confirm it. Like, what lab do you have in the middle of New York where they just ad hoc put up a bunch of tents?
Movie magic. This is all that this is. It's not science.
And then Audrey continues to be a dick, and
Audrey's the worst.
This is right after she looks at the picture of them together when they were in college.
I know, and she's like, "Oh, remember that? So sweet." But let me screw him.
Yep.
One last
the video,
time.
Watches the video, is like, "Yo, this is gold." Snatches it and then bounces, doesn't say a word, and just thinks she's gonna get the scoop of the century.
Manages to get out of the military tent city
With these top secret videos,
VHS tapes were so bulky too. Like they were harder to hide than some of the
big.
stuff we have now.
she goes and records her scoop, turns it into her new studio, and you know what happens? The most like poetic justice ever. They cut her out, use all the footage, and then let her asshole boss record over it to get all the credit for that busting that story. And it was like, you know what? As much as I don't like him, I like you even less because you just did Nick dirty.
Well, we already knew the boss was evil, right? Like we already knew he was that
It
kind
was
of
already
a person.
established, yeah.
Whereas like we're supposed to like Audrey, like we're supposed to hope she doesn't
She's
get
supposed
eaten.
to be the heroine of this movie.
But you just Audrey's the worst.
Yeah, but yeah, that was awesome. And then at the most inopportune moment during the little strategy meeting, they find out about the news coverage. And they're like, let's
The
pause
news goes live.
everything, all watch what's going on. And they see the whole report, including all of the like footage that's supposed to be top secret. And Nick dimes himself out. He's like, that's supposed to be in my tent. How did they get that? Oh, wait, I left Audrey there. And then they proceed to kick him out.
Well, this is after he's told the military that this boy lizard, because they insist that it's still a boy, even though it's pregnant,
Reproduces asexually.
and that it's got to have up to 12 eggs, which once again, no reason for assuming 12 eggs.
This is what I meant by nonsensical leaps in logic.
Many reptiles lay more than
Way
12
more.
eggs. And
So how did you come to that number?
Godzilla's the size of a skyscraper, so you could sort of assume that if it has eggs and not live young, which some reptiles have live young, that I think more than 12 would be reasonable
Yep. So
and
after,
terrifying.
after he outlined that this is all a potential problem, that news story breaks, and they're like, yeah, F whatever you said, we're just going to do our own thing. Get out. Just because he messed up and leaked information doesn't mean that he doesn't know what he's talking about.
So, like, hypothetically, because he did leak information, wouldn't the next logical step be to arrest him?
Instead of just let him walk free? That was crazy to me.
Like, shouldn't he be in the brig, the tent city brig in the middle of New York?
Or something, at least under watch, right? Because he just leaked information. So why wouldn't you want to keep people on him? Instead, they just escort him out, send him on his way with all this stuff.
And this is where Audrey continues to be the worst, because she sees him getting into a taxi and then is like, oh my God, were you fired?
Before that happens, though, he does manage to find Dr. Chapman, and it's like, hey, I know they want to discredit everything I've said. You got to keep them on the course. Make sure they find that nest. And then he gets kicked out.
Right, and then Audrey, as the worst, once again, is like, oh my God, did they fire you? Yeah, bitch.
Yeah,
they did.
What'd you think was going to happen when you took that off my tent?
And then she's like, oh, are you mad at me?
Well, no, she was even worse. She was like, but I didn't even get credit for it. So you
So it
shouldn't be
doesn't
mad
count.
at me. Yeah,
It
you shouldn't
doesn't
really
count.
be mad at me. I didn't think they were going to do this to you. You know, I thought they were just going to give you a little slap on the wrist. But you know what?
Because Audrey's the worst.
Kudos to Nick, though, because he was like, deuces, I'm out of here. Go live your life. Go be a great reporter, whatever you want to do. And then proceeds to leave. I wish he had kept that, like,
Attitude, yeah.
later in the movie, because, spoiler, they kind of get back together. But whatever.
You know what he should have done? He should have hooked up with the redheaded dinosaur girl.
I feel like she would have been better for him than Audrey.
You know she's a freak in the sheets.
Well,
like,
she's just straightforward too. She like if she doesn't want you anymore, she's gonna be open about it. She's not gonna beat around the bush. She's not gonna tug you along. She'll be like, yeah, I'm bored. I'm gone. Bye. It's better than like, miss, I'm gonna toy with your emotions.
she's a bored scientist who's been hitting on him throughout the whole movie. You know she's a freak in the sheets. He would have had a way better time with the dinosaur girl. And then anyways, Nick proceeds to promptly get kidnapped by the Frenchman, who is now a taxi driver.
We're missing some points. So Nick and Audrey have their little falling out. He gets in the cab. The cab pulls away. Animal sees the whole thing and is like, I'm gonna go talk some sense into him because he's from New York and that's how New York people talk. So he gets in his little creeper 15-passenger blacked out window van and starts chasing after them. So he watches Nick get kidnapped by the Frenchman.
He doesn't know he's being kidnapped. For him, though, it just looks like Nick's be driving away.
Yeah. And well, he follows him all the way back to their like little base. And the Frenchman spent almost no time at all convincing Nick because he's like, yeah, we're the only other people that want to find the nest. So come with us. Okay, let's go.
If this was a slightly different movie, this is how Nick would meet a very brutal IDTV themed end.
Oh yeah, he would have been
'Cause
trafficked.
at no point did he question the creepy warehouse, the creepy taxi driver, the fact that he was promptly kidnapped.
He doesn't question anything else.
He's just like, yeah, let's find them babies.
yeah, let's find the nest. He doesn't know if these people are trying to kidnap one so they can take it back to their country.
Nope.
He doesn't think this out at all. He just thinks, oh, they're on my side. They're trying to do their
The
own
worm
thing.
guy asks no questions, probably because he's been working with worms in Chernobyl for like however many years.
Yeah.
He's not used to having company or people to talk to anymore. That's what's happened.
Yep. So I put Nick then proceeds to be kidnapped by our American coffee hating Frenchman. Oh, this is actually where we get his name. His name is Philippe. We spend like 3/4 of the movie and have no idea what this guy's name is. Philippe convinces Nick to come with him because he's the only other person who also wants to find the nest. Philippe explains that he's been attempting to protect his country by fixing the mistakes they made, i.e. the nuclear testing, which created Godzilla. And it works. Nick's in. Then they cut back to Animal and Lucy, his girlfriend or wife.
I think she's his wife, but they're, once again, this is in my notes where I have the worst kind of couple friend are these two.
Oh,
they are absolutely the kind of couple friends who fight in front of you, drag each other also all over social media, call you at like 2 a.m. to come get them because they've been fighting, and then 2 weeks later are back together and in love, and don't you dare judge our relationship.
Oh, yeah, 100%. They want no input from anybody, even though they make their stuff as public as possible.
Like, one of the reasons Audrey even decided to steal Nick's tape is because Lucy gave her this whole speech at the beginning about how she doesn't have what it takes to make it in New York, and she's not mean enough. And Victor's basically like,
She's right.
yeah.
Anyways, they cut back to Animal and Lucy, who's taken in apparently everyone in the neighborhood that's been displaced. So she has like a little soup kitchen thing going on in their apartment. Animal talks with Audrey, who's losing it because she thinks she's fucked it up with the only person who's ever loved her and probably ever will love her because she's a snake.
Which, once again, they like reconnected for what? Half an hour tops?
Yeah,
while
it
Nick
wasn't
turned blood into urine somehow?
Yeah, it wasn't anything that deep. Like, they literally haven't seen each other in years.
Hypothetically, how did she think it was gonna end? Like, she was gonna ruin his career, possibly get him thrown in military jail, and then he was gonna call her and be like, let's date.
Yeah, I don't know what she was thinking.
She's crying in the bed. Animal doesn't care because he's also not a great person, and is like, let's sneak out.
Well, his idea is, hey, how about we record? I just watched Nick hook up with these other people. They look like they're going after the nest. I don't know how he jumps to that conclusion because it's not like he like eavesdropped and like learned anything. All he did was see them go into a building and then was like, oh, he's got some other thing going on. So he's like, hey, let's go record them finding the nest of the eggs and saving New York. And then we can, fix his reputation.
Which, once again, there's some big leaps in this logic.
Yeah, I don't understand how they connected all these dots. But that's his harebrained idea. And then she's like, why are we climbing out the window? Oh, I can't let Lucy know I'm going to do this.
She'll kill me. Which, I mean, like,
Fair.
to be fair to Lucy, yeah, this sounds like a dumb plan. And they don't bring any kind of reasonable supplies, just cameras and, like, a purse.
Yep. So they cut back to Nick and Philippe. And Philippe introduces him to his little Frenchman gang they got going on. And they're going to disguise in military uniforms and go into the city and track down the nest.
It's okay though, Sam. They have gum. It makes them look American.
And at the exact same time, Animal and Audrey somehow know exactly where to look. They go down into this sewer subway tunnel, and they somehow know this is the place to go. Nick and crew also make it down into the tunnels after a very terrible Elvis impression to make them look more American.
With the gum, yeah, that's what they did.
It's so funny to me because I'm like, the military literally has people of all ethnicities, people that speak multiple languages. You could literally have the worst English accent ever, and nobody in the military would ever question you because they all know someone.
Right, they're not going to be like, that dude has a French accent. He's clearly here to mess up our grand plans and as a spy.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that they had no real ID was probably a bigger concern.
Yeah, or like an actual unit or any kind of chain of command at all.
That their uniforms didn't look that legit.
They literally could have just drove through and nobody would have questioned anything.
That being said, Godzilla has made a bunch of giant tunnels that are probably really unstable. They probably could have just snuck in
anywhere
on a
to be
side
honest.
tunnel. I don't think they need to go through the main one.
If Audrey and Animal can get in, why couldn't they just drive in like everyone else? They could have just looked like regular New Yorkers. Just
like you said, though.
I'm going back home. Stop me.
They set this up to make the military look dumb.
It really did. Nick and crew make it down into the tunnels. While going through the tunnels, both groups hear lots of rumbling. They cut back and forth between Nick and Audrey, little groups, and they hear a lot of rumbling. And then out of nowhere, Godzilla comes crashing through the wall and passes right by both groups. Both groups still haven't run into each other, but somehow they're both seeing Godzilla at the same time. And then we see the military's second attempt at trying to take Godzilla down. Unfortunately for them, Godzilla sees the pile of fish and is like, nope. It just goes in the other direction. So they tried to lure Godzilla into Central Park with another pile of fish, and Godzilla just doesn't take the bait. Turns around, and then the second cheesiest chase scene happens where they again go through New York, and you can tell they were trying to show like the graphical potential of that era, where they have like this Godzilla and a bunch of like fighter jets all chasing Godzilla while Godzilla's
to be
through the
fair,
city.
Godzilla looks decent. Like, Godzilla's graphics hold up pretty well. It's just the building scenes that are real bad.
The cityscapes, the like F-18s that they're supposed to be out there.
The explosions, not great.
Yeah, they don't look like F-18s either. They look more like F-16s. So it's like really confusing because they're clearly like saying that they're like naval ships that are coming out. So they call them F-18s, but they're clearly not F-18s.
Which, I mean, to be fair to them,
it takes like 2 seconds to research
I wouldn't know the difference. So maybe they were just counting on a lot of people who were like me. It's a big ship.
Yeah, I was like, it's a fighter jet. All fighter jets look the same.
Right. I mean, that's how I am about cars. I feel like, what kind of car is it? I don't know, black one.
So again, the military proceeds to do more damage than Godzilla, and they just show this really long chase scene where Godzilla eventually jumps into the water, and they have 2 submarines that are on standby, and Godzilla again proves that Godzilla's about that Weave City because she dodges all of the torpedoes and manages to circle them back onto the submarine. So she destroys one submarine and then isn't able to dodge the torpedoes from the second submarine. So they think they got, I keep saying her, it. And then it goes down into the water and they're like all celebrating. And then in the midst of the celebrations, Dr. Chapman is like, hey, we need to find the nest. So just when they think they're gonna like, they're all done, they're like, I guess we'll go put a search team together and we'll see if we can find the nest. So the military sends people out to try to go find it. And then we cut back to Nick and friends as they come out at Madison Square Garden. And at great timing, Animal and Audrey arrive at the exact same time, but again, at a different area. So they're each coming into the same giant stadium, but they still haven't met each other yet.
I'm not familiar with the topography of New York because that's not where I'm from. I visited like once when I was 15 and I only did very touristy, saw the Statue of Liberty type stuff. But I have questions about how they were at secret military tunnels in vans and then all of a sudden they're in Madison Square Garden, which is like a stadium.
Yep.
I have some questions about the logistics of that are not important, but I still question them.
It doesn't make sense.
No.
I can guarantee you, if you look at the actual landmarks they like talk about in the movie, they're miles apart.
Yeah.
They're not anywhere near each other. But
And
somehow they managed to make it to these spots over and over again.
And somehow they managed to get inside this giant stadium and don't notice the 6-7 foot sticky looking eggs.
No, they do. So they're gonna cut through the side area. So think about concession stand when you're going into a big giant stadium. They're in that circle area before you actually make it into the arena.
But even then, the way you walk into most arenas, I feel like you kind of look to the left and be like, a lot of eggs.
You've never been to an arena as big as Madison Square Garden,
That's true.
It is gigantic. And they have there's so many ways to walk into an arena that I can understand why they wouldn't see anything until they actually got, because they're saying that all of the eggs, so there's hundreds of these eggs that are all in these central areas. So think about the basketball court at the Phoenix Arena. All the eggs are only at the basketball court, and some of them are in the stands. So until you actually walk in, you don't actually see them.
Either way, I feel like as soon as you walk in and you see one giant 7 foot sticky egg, you should walk back out.
This is what's hilarious is Nick walks in and he's like, oh wow, there's 6 eggs here. That's more than I thought we'd run into. Yeah, there's a few more than that. And then he looks over and he's like, oh, there's 12. Nah, bruh, keep looking.
Then they flick on the lights. Oh, snap.
There are hundreds of these eggs.
Which honestly should have been their original guess. When you look at the size of Godzilla, you should have been like, of course there's going to be hundreds of eggs.
Well, what's crazier to me is that they stopped to inspect the eggs. Because as soon as they started immediately making sounds, nah, these eggs are bigger than me. I'm going to start running.
If there were no sounds made, they should have been like, we found the nest, turned around, and walked back out. Because I'm going to repeat. You know what? You see this in every animal-themed or horror movie anywhere. They're like, oh my god, a giant sticky mystery thing that looks horrible. Let's touch it. This is how every alien, let's touch it.
This is even worse because these are 8-foot eggs.
They're huge.
They're all taller than all of them. And so how, in what rational world do you think you can handle what's going on? Bullets aren't going to take these things out. There's no way you have enough bullets to take out all these even if you could. So you head back out, you call the military, and you're like, hey, bomb the F out of Madison Square Garden. That whole place needs to get burned to the ground.
Light it on fire.
Yeah, they just got to redo the whole thing.
And so the eggs are starting to move. They should be more concerned than what they are because hypothetically these are going to be 8-foot lizard monsters. And Audrey and Animal have still not run into the French spies and Nick. They're all still separate at this point.
They come in on let's say the opposite side of the arena, and they're experiencing the exact same thing at the same time though. The eggs start making sounds and they're like, Animal's over here trying to get video footage, and Audrey's like, bruh, we need to go. We need to go now.
Which, I will give this to Audrey because she is the worst. She chooses not to leave Animal there, and I gotta tell you, I'm a different kind of the worst because I'd have been like, I'm out, man, and I would have left him.
I'm out. I'd have been running very quick. As soon as I clocked what those were, and especially after they started making sounds, I'd have been, nope. And just gone.
Because you know what? When you watch alligators hatch and they make the little cheepy noises and then you can see them start to poke their way out the egg, be terrified. They're going to be hungry.
Yeah. So I put...
Which is exactly what happens. They come out of the eggs and they're hungry.
They start hatching and baby Godzillas, aka velociraptors, very quickly feed on all the fish. Because there's fish all over this place. So they start eating all the fish and then before long, they're out of fish. And you know what?
Both groups of humans choose to stand there and watch them eat the fish for some reason.
Yep. Nick, of course, our idea engine comes up, quickly realizes that they all kind of smell like fish. Because both groups were around the giant piles of fish, and they're like, maybe now's a good time to leave.
Even if they didn't smell like fish, somebody should have been like, hey guys, these giant lizard things are probably going to try to eat us. Let's run.
Yep. And this is actually the kind of sad part because all the Frenchmen from their little squad start dropping like flies.
So they do all run and they start trying to bar the doors, but of course these are massive baby lizard monsters and that doesn't work. And so they all one by one get eaten.
Yep. And Animal and Audrey managed to make it to the Nick's shower room and make it into the Nick's shower room before becoming baby Zilla food. The military, now that adult Godzilla is dead. Oh, this is where Dr. Chapman tells them, hey, go find the nest. Philippe and Nick managed to get into a stairwell and barricade themselves in and then attempt to use payphones, which is another call out, to contact the military, but they keep getting, oh, it's busy, call back later. And the Frenchmen decide, the whole French squad, because there's a few of them that are still left, decide they're going to sacrifice themselves to try to give Nick a chance to get out because he's the most likely person who can talk to the military to get something happening there.
Which, in this part of the movie, all I can think was, these French spies have been 2 steps ahead of everybody. They've laid spy equipment, and none of them were maybe we should have a plan to call for help if we
a
find the
satellite
nest.
phone or something. They had no
Flare gun. I don't know.
backup plan to like
Anything.
signal someone, hey, help.
If we find the nest full of murderous giant lizard babies, maybe we should have a plan about what to do next. No, they're just winging it.
I gotta tell you, they went full horror movie style on this too. You get to watch like 2 or 3 of them just horror movie deaths.
Jurassic Park themed.
Yeah.
Straight up.
In this moment, they let Nick try to run away. And eventually, after like a bunch of turns, he gets cornered and then he gets saved by the elevator. The elevator comes at just the right time for him to get away.
Maybe in old school elevators it's different, but nowadays Nick would have been eaten because when you stick your hand in between the elevator doors, it opens back up. And he gets in the elevator and the baby Godzilla puts its head in and he like takes his foot, I think, and shoves it back out and manages to close the doors.
Yeah, and he does it so slowly too. He does it like back out.
Nonchalantly. Like, okay,
Yeah.
baby lizard, time to get out of the elevator now. The sensor should have kicked in, the elevator should have opened, and our worm guy should have been brutally eaten. That's how this movie should have ended, right there.
Yep. So after several failed floors, he finally gets to the like what looks like the lobby, and he runs back into Philippe. And with great comedic timing, Audrey and Animal, who've been crawling through vents to try to avoid the Babyzillas, falls out at this very moment.
Which honestly, that's a better plan than counting on the elevator to
Oh,
save you.
facts. But they spend like 5 or 10 minutes catching up. Audrey and Animal remember that they have a broadcast studio for Madison Square Garden for the Knicks games, and they figure that might be the best way for them to get a message out. So they run up to the broadcast room. Audrey and Animal manage to get a message over to the other studio and telling them, hey, you need to broadcast us. We got something going on. At first, they were like, I'm not putting you on the air. But then Animal uses the camera to show them all the Babyzillas in the middle of the stadium. And they're like,
And the quality of the video is garbage, I want to say. Just another throwback to the era.
oh, yeah, that's pretty bad. And so Nick and Audrey have their little moment on camera because Audrey's reporting everything that's going on, and she calls over Nick. Mr. Nico, it sounds like your hypothesis was correct about what was going on. And they make googly eyes at each other.
She gets to live out her dream right before she becomes Godzilla Chow.
Yep. Oh, they get a message from the other broadcast studio saying the military is going to blow that place up in 6 minutes. You need to get out. And with a little motivation from a lot of Babyzillas started crashing into their broadcast room, they escape back into the main area, like rappelling down a rope. And then they manage to make it all the way to the lobby just to find the lobby full of Babyzillas.
Which, once again, probably should have been where this movie truly ended. They should have been eaten.
Yeah, but they, in good Hollywood fashion, see some very fancy light fixtures and start shooting them down and crashing and making the Babyzillas go all over the place. But I'm like, they really would have just jumped out of the way and then just came back in.
Not only that, but shrapnel, which is probably something to be actually concerned about. This is my luck in the horror movie. I would have made it to this point and then got taken out by some shrapnel from a chandelier.
Yeah. They managed to make it all the way to the door and somehow managed to barricade the door from these little
These
Babyzillas.
glass doors, these Babyzillas have gone through metal, concrete, rebar, but
The glass door is too good.
and a used up machine gun held them for long enough for them to run away to not get exploded.
Which is another thing. There's no way they got far enough out of the blast radius to not at bare minimum get knocked on their feet or unconscious from the concussion. Because they bombed Madison Square Garden. It collapsed into the ground.
But good news, Animal, Audrey, Dr. Nick, and Philippe all make it out. And then, of course, it's raining because it's raining in every scene in this movie. And Audrey and Nick have a moment and start to make out right there next to all the little dead Babyzillas.
Yep.
Because that's the most romantic thing in the world.
But little did they know, the movie still had 20 minutes left.
It's like, not over.
Yeah, apparently adult Godzilla, or for all we know, this could have been a second one, because they don't really elicit, or they don't really explain where the second one come from. We just assume that the one that got torpedoed down, because I would have thought they would have tried to recover the body. At bare minimum.
Science?
For investigative reasons. Apparently they didn't. And they just thought, oh, it's dead, it's in the sea, we're not retrieving it.
Joke's on you, not dead and pissed as hell that you guys just blew up her babies.
Oh, yeah. You could tell she was sniffing the little baby corpses.
It was really sad, actually.
Looked at them and was like, it's on. So these guys managed to find a taxi, hotwire it with a knife, and then go on another wild chase scene through New York. They're zipping through in a taxi while Godzilla's on their heels.
Godzilla has taken out so many military vehicles, but this little janky-ass taxi manages to evade her.
Over and over and over again. They even have that little moment where Nick pulls out a paper map and he's trying to navigate.
Which, once again, throwback to the 90s. Paper maps, no GPS. It's awesome.
Yep. I think about how pizza delivery guys used to just get an address and would just magically find your house.
I had to tell you, when I was learning how to drive and I did not have GPS, because my family took a little longer to catch up to technology than when it came out, I wanted to cry every time someone was like, read the paper map, Lacey. I have so many memories of my childhood of sitting in the passenger seat and my nanny yelling at me while I cried because I can't read the paper map fast enough for her. And we'd miss the turnoff and then it would be all my fault. If I was reading the paper map in this taxi, everybody would die. That's all that would happen.
Well, they had 2 New Yorkers back there too who were kind of directing. Nick wasn't really doing much with the map, let's be serious. But they did come across a military convoy while they were running away from Godzilla. And Nick had the genius idea to throw out the cab identification because apparently each cabbie has his own frequency on the radio. And so he throws it out at, I can't remember, what was the guy's name?
I don't know. A military guy, he gets treated really badly throughout the whole movie.
He gets treated like crap. Because he's like the sergeant that's like in charge of all the ground troops. And I was like, one, it wouldn't be a sergeant, it'd be a staff NCO. But they have this guy running around essentially taking the colonel's orders and directing everyone.
I put down, doesn't die, but probably wishes he had.
Oh, yeah.
Because they are constantly yelling at this poor dude.
Yeah, Nick manages to throw out the cab driver identification, and then they call the cab agency to figure out, because they get the cab number and they know whose cab it's supposed to be, so get the frequency so they can talk to Nick while he's running around getting chased by Godzilla. And they manage to back themselves into a tunnel that Godzilla can't seem to get into, and they talk over. Nick comes up with another strategy, because Nick's our master strategist, to lure Godzilla to a bridge. I believe it's the Brooklyn Bridge. And then get it in range of like F-18 so they can attack it. Manage to get out of the tunnel by high beaming Godzilla to blind her. And then they zip out, get to the bridge somehow without dying, and Godzilla gets all tangled up in all the ropes that are happening on the bridge. And then it gets attacked by a couple F-18s. They actually get eaten by Godzilla. But there's like a random electrical wire that's hanging. Nick manages to grab it and shock Godzilla to drop them so they can manage to make it across the bridge. Godzilla gets all tangled up, gets shot by all of the missiles. She crashes to the ground, makes eye contact with Nick, and she looks at Nick all sad and then passes away, which is technically the end of the movie, but it's actually the beginning of the cartoon series. So there's a cartoon series called Godzilla 2000, and the exact 5 minutes of the last 5 minutes of the movie, they reenact that in cartoon form.
Well, it's almost the end of the movie. The very end of the movie is we go back. I'm assuming maybe a tunnel near Madison Square Gardens because they really did blow up Madison Square Garden pretty thoroughly.
Oh, you see the egg hatch?
And we see one egg that they didn't kill, and it's starting to hatch. And so that's the end of the movie is right there.
Yep, setting it up just in case they want to make another one, which they did.
No, this is the one, maybe not the one, but this Godzilla movie isn't part of a series. It stands on its own in the Godzilla verse.
Assuming you discount the cartoons. Cartoon had 2 seasons.
Fair. Well, it stands on its own as a movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what are your thoughts on this particular movie overall?
I love this movie. It was great.
This is the Godzilla of my childhood, so I really liked it.
This is the first Godzilla I ever watched.
It's nostalgic for me.
And I love this movie so much. I remember I had light up Godzilla tennis shoes that, like, you know, the ones that you walk and they glow or they light up. I had those. And these were the shoes that replaced my toy soldier shoes, and I loved those shoes. So I was really about the Godzilla back then. The idea of a giant monster, and the only thing that I didn't like about this Godzilla movie, and this was years later, is that it didn't have like plasma breath, which I love. Is a big iconic part of Godzilla that they didn't put in this movie. But to be fair, this Godzilla isn't Godzilla.
This Godzilla isn't really more of the legendary like Titan Godzilla. This is literally just a mutated giant iguana.
Yeah, I feel like they could have gotten away with not calling this Godzilla.
Yeah, it
probably would have did just as well. It
really didn't follow more of the traditional like monster lore.
Yeah, what you would expect from it. They did like the stereotypical stuff, like the stuttering Japanese fisherman who's like Godzilla, Godzilla.
I'm still confused about what the point of the lighter was. I should look that up.
There was no point. They just like having different effects cinematically. Like there is no there can't be a logical reason because they don't bring the lighter back up any other point in the movie. It'd be one thing if he was like a nervous flick that he does, like he had like a Zippo lighter and he always flicked it open and then turned it on and then closed it. If it was like that, I would understand. Like that's just his thing. But it wasn't.
No, his thing was coffee.
He has the lighter one time in the whole movie and does his thing.
Oh, and for the record, because we didn't cover it, Philippe lives and gets away. So.
Yes, he actually steals a video from Animal, who's been recording the whole time, and said, "Hey, I'm going to edit a few things out, and then I'll send this back to your friend," which was kind of funny. Philippe's keeping his MO from beginning to end.
You know when Animal got home, Lucy just tore him a new butthole.
Oh, for sure. It's from New York. That's what they do.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is 1998 Godzilla. If you want to keep listening, we're going to discuss a few things. But other than that, that's the recap of the movie.
Catch you next time.
welcome to our first monsterverse moment, which is going to be the section of our podcast where we pick a theme based on the video that we just reviewed, and we sort of take a little bit of a deeper dive into it, or we just explore that subject so we talk about it more. So, for today, in honor of Dr. Nico Tatopoulos, aka our worm guy, we're going to be discussing the effects of radiation on insects at Chernobyl, specifically worms. I hate to disappoint everybody because I was a little disappointed when I found this out, but there are not larger than average worms at Chernobyl. No. In fact, I looked it up, and the common earthworm is on average like 7 to 9 inches, and so even if they were 17% bigger, we're looking at like 9 to 11 inches, which is just not that fun or impressive.
Not as much as you would think as the movies made it sound.
Well, it just like 17% sounds really big, and then you look at it and you're like, never mind. I'm sad. Not only are there not larger than average worms in Chernobyl, no larger than average insects. For the most part, adult insects don't really suffer the same kind of effects from radiation that other animals do. The adult ones, unless they're actively growing or shedding an exoskeleton, their cells don't divide that much. And they have a simpler cell structure to begin with. Unless they're in the initial blast radius with the heat, they do pretty okay. What does tend to suffer are their eggs and larvae, because a lot of those grow in the soil. So that does seem to provide at least some kind of impact on their growth patterns and how they develop. They've done a lot of studies, and while they're not finding giant insects, what they are finding is malformed insects, which happens to a lot of creatures that are exposed to radiation. Bent antennas, weird legs, extra body parts, things along those lines.
I figured most insects, one, don't have a lifespan long enough to actually be able to see results, and because the cycle is so short, even if there were mutations, they probably wouldn't survive. Most of them wouldn't survive anyways.
Yeah. And then some of that too depends on how they exist. Things that live in the soil tend to be impacted a lot harder. Animals and creatures in general that are migratory, because they might only come back to that area for a very specific phase in their lifespan.
Not to mention, instinct might keep them away from any really dangerous areas. They might be the vibes are off. Let's go somewhere else.
And like you said, a lot of them have really, really short lifespans. Yeah. So, it's not quite the same thing. And there actually is a lot of debate going on about whether or not Chernobyl's actually becoming better for animal life or wildlife because there's no humans there anymore.
Oh, and so many years have passed too, so the radiation levels are probably significantly lower now.
They are lower. They're still there, and they're still bad, especially once again in the soil, because it all sort of settles there. Birds, for instance, might be migratory, and they might just come back for a little bit. And they are seeing a lot of malformations in a lot of those animals. There's a really well-published study. You can look it up, Google. A lot of birds have partial albinism, where they developed all these little white spots. And some of that might be genetic. They're not totally sure, but it also doesn't really harm you to be covered in little, to have just lost some color. However, if you've developed cataracts, that's harmful. If you develop reproductive issues, which a lot of those animals do, that's bad for the population.
That's another thing I figured we might not see a lot of result because a lot of them just couldn't reproduce anymore. Mm-hmm.
Disappointing, but yeah. So there's not larger than average worms. Interestingly enough, though, and this has nothing to do with earthworms, they did find nematodes in the soil, which are microscopic worms that had no evidence of radiation poisoning or damage or effects on their DNA. They think that's because these nematode worms have really simple genomes and short lifespans, and which means they have multiple generations in really fast succession. And they're actually looking into those nematodes for cancer research. They found that there's not anything really genetically different about them than other nematodes of that same species in other parts of the world. They just seem to be, for whatever reason, to resist the cellular damage.
I was going to say, so they're curious if they managed to just flat out dodge it, or if there's some kind of special evolutionary thing they have going on that might be able to prevent or
Yeah, so they're using it to see why because other kinds of nematodes would have in the past shown
some type of contamination.
Yeah, but this particular species, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, it's a very long scientific looking word.
They dodged that bullet.
Isn't showing any of that damage. So they're trying to compare, what about their cellular structure is different from other tiny microscopic worms. That's not fun. But that being said, while there aren't bigger than average worms in Chernobyl. Sorry, Dr. Totopoulos. There are actually big earthworms in the world in general. Like, they do exist. Those are a thing. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
As long as they're not on me, I don't care.
The largest earthworm is called a Gippsland earthworm, and it's in Australia.
Of course it is.
Everything is in Australia, right? Like, if you're like, I want to find a weird animal, you're like, let's go to Australia.
Let me find something that shouldn't be able to kill me that can kill me.
Yeah. So, how big do you think this earthworm is, Sam?
It's its biggest in the world. It's probably something insane, like 50 or 60 inches. Or is it meters? Because that's
so
insane.
they measure in meters, but because we're American and that means nothing to me, I had to put it into feet because
Okay. It's feet?
it means nothing to me. Like, if you're like, it's 2 meters, nothing. Nothing computes over here. I have no mental, like, picture of that.
2 feet? 3 feet?
A giant Gippsland earthworm can grow... On average, they are usually around 3 feet, but they have been recorded as large as 9 feet.
That's insane. That's
Yeah.
that's a fat ass one.
They are big earthworms, okay? They only live in this very, very specific part of Australia.
That I'm not going to.
They're essentially endangered because they only live in this, like, one tiny part. It's being farmed, and so, like, sometimes farmers accidentally dig them up and kill them.
If I saw a fucking 6-foot worm,
Well, I mean, they have weird squishy bodies. They're easy to accidentally kill. And they can't tolerate being touched, so if you do accidentally pull one up and then you touch it, you're probably going to kill it. And then according to the interweb, because this is where I get all my facts, they only have like one baby at a time.
Oh, wow, so they reproduce really slow.
Really slow, and then that one baby takes forever to become an adult.
Yeah.
They live in burrows. Those burrows can go as deep as 5 feet.
That's terrifying. So there's 5-foot tunnels, or 5 feet deep tunnels under me as I'm walking over their little area.
Yeah, I think...
Yeah, I'm not sketched out by that at all.
Right. I think my favorite fact about them, though, is that people can actually hear them moving underground and have recorded the noise.
No!
Would you like to hear said noise?
That's enough. These little terror worms. They're like the baby tremors. Or graboids. Graboids, is that what they call them?
Yeah, our card graboids. So that is the sound of a giant Gippsland earthworm.
Under the ground.
Yeah.
God, that sounds disgusting.
So people record that. Would you like to see a picture?
Sure. No, that's piqued my curiosity. Looks like a snake skin, like it got shed.
So you can see. They're big.
Yeah. They look gross.
It's a worm. How cute did you think it was going to look?
Well, at least snakes don't look gross.
No, so they're really big. They're also pretty protected. You're not really supposed to touch them.
Yeah, you see all these pictures of people touching them.
Yeah, you're not really supposed to. All right, so that is generally acknowledged to be the largest earthworm. Unfortunately, though, maybe not unfortunately, where they are finding different species of giant earthworms tend to be in really, like, isolated pockets of, like, very specific terrain.
There could be more of them out there.
There could be, and we just don't know about them. So the next acknowledged biggest earthworm, where do you think that's located, Sam?
Florida.
No, although that would make sense.
It would try.
Oregon.
Really?
Yep, the Oregon giant earthworm grows up to 4.5 feet.
So
And they say about because worms are stretchy, so you can...
technically make them longer.
Yeah, but that's not healthy for the worm, obviously. And then the next one is something called a giant Palouse earthworm, and I might be saying that wrong. It might be Palouse earthworm, and that one is found in eastern Washington and northern Idaho, and it gets to be about 3 feet. And they recently thought for a long time that one was extinct, but they do occasionally still find it, so they're thinking not extinct, just rare.
They're probably worms that like predominantly stay underground. So if we don't go out of our way to search for them, we're not gonna find them.
Yeah, but allegedly that one, the giant Palouse earthworm, smells like lilies and is white.
Oh, that sounds like a trap. I
don't know, that seems concerning to me, the fact that it smells like a flower.
Yeah, it sounds like it's luring something in, right?
Earthworms, for the most part, just eat fungi, detritus, general dirty type sludgy stuff.
Yeah, like tree stump stuff from the Magic School Bus.
Yeah, so they're just kind of big whitish worms.
Oh, okay.
They're not as interesting
terrifying
looking.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, I can't imagine as a kid coming across that, especially from where from, because I would instantly assume it's a snake.
I think a lot of people do, and they cut off their heads and then are like, oh, my bad.
This is a super highly endangered worm.
Yeah. Anyways, not to disappoint anybody, but there are no giant earthworms or giant earthworm studies that we know of happening in Chernobyl. However, If you want to go see giant earthworms, I recommend Googling the giant Gippsland earthworm and taking a look at that thing, because it's giant.
It will give you nightmares.
If not nightmares, you can at least show somebody the little recorded audio of it moving through the ground and freak them out.
The squelching, gross.
But anyways, thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed our podcast. And if you like what I heard, go ahead and leave us a review and 5 stars, but only if it's nice, because we're a new podcast.
Bye.